Dale Pugsley turned 45 this summer, but it wasn't a happy birthday. He spent more than half of his life in Virginia prisons and could very well die there for something he did when he was a kid.
I was 18 years old, and it was a crack deal. I was selling drugs. I grew up selling drugs to my father. I was in a real dysfunctional household, and I'm not making excuses, but that was my life. That's what I knew. I had been in and out of juvie since I was 14 years old. I was a career criminal by the time I was 14.
And that meant...
I was in a real dysfunctional household, and I'm not making excuses, but that was my life. I got to arguing over crack. He was refusing to pay me. I pulled out the gun really to intimidate him.
And that meant...
He tried to take it, and I shot him, and killed him. I say accidentally because it wasn't my intention to kill him.
Pugsley was charged with second-degree murder. Sentencing guidelines for the crime dictated a prison term of 5 to 40 years, but Pugsley got 58. The jury might have assumed he would be eligible for parole, but it had just been abolished in Virginia, and courts were not telling juries about the change. Pugsley settled in at Red Onion Prison in Wise County and began the education he didn't get outside.
I came at a time where older guys were giving you books. Conversations were happening back then. What does it mean to be a black man in America? What does it mean to be a prisoner in America? How much should you be held accountable for being a victim of certain circumstances? Does society owe us anything?
One of them lent him the selected works of Vladimir Lenin, but Pugsley wasn't much of a reader. He asked his mentor for a simple explanation, a summary.
He's like, man, hell no. Take my dictionary. I don't give a damn. It take you 3 days to read 3 pages. You read it, you come back and you tell me what it means to you, man. Now, I'm at the level where, I read and study all the time by myself, and I pay it forward. I try to do the same thing with some of the younger guys.
He chose a new name for himself, drawing from several African languages, Askari Lumumba, meaning a reliable, learned, and gifted soldier. He was transferred to a lower security prison, where he worked with professional counselors to help fellow inmates manage anger and address substance abuse. He talked to them about the way Virginia handles people convicted of crimes. A 2012 study by the Pew Charitable Trust found on average this state has the 4th longest prison sentences in the nation.
There's something wrong where you only have 9% of the general public that's African-American male, but 65% of the system is African-American male.
And he pointed out that inmates make less than $1 an hour to manufacture license plates, furniture, and clothing for a state-run corporation.
They're able to exploit our labor because we're not protected by the Fair Labor Standards Act, and we're not protected by Virginia's Minimum Wage Act. And we're talking about an agency that makes nearly $100 million a year on prison labor.
The state was spending less than $2 a day to feed each inmate. It had been sued and lost in court for providing inadequate medical care, and Lumumba said the staff was not large enough to ensure prisoner safety. He founded a chapter of Black Lives Matter in prison and began to organize people on the outside via email, asking them to press for human rights behind bars.
Better visitation for our families, a cleaner prison, clean water. The water was brown. Less group punishment, just overall moral respect for our humanity. We initially started writing informal complaints and grievances, and they wouldn't respond to us. So our response to that was to develop a petition to be sent to citizens, posted online, to raise awareness and to ask for help from the citizenry. And the idea was that we were going to send it to many grassroots organizations and post it online with the hopes that we could get people to go to the Department of Corrections on our behalf and speak for us.
55 men signed the petition. The Department of Corrections responded by putting Lumumba in solitary confinement.
Long-term segregation is for the most dangerous prisoners in the state of Virginia. Guys are sent back there for stabbings, escapes, serious charges. They have you back there for emails and petitions. The Department of Corrections is not tolerant at all of prisoners being political or exercising political speech, and they will go to great lengths to silence us.
And he found staff behavior especially troubling.
We have a staff that's made up of typically working class people who are frustrated with their own social grievances, and they bring those problems into work. They themselves are dealing with psychological stress, and we are an easy outlet, an easy punching bag, if you will. The biggest thing I see is disrespect in the form of verbal abuse. Of course, there's going to be racial remarks, but there's also remarks about your masculinity, about your humanity, and, just about your lack of power.
But he was determined to make the best of his time in solitary. He was certified as a paralegal and co-founded the nonprofit Prisoners' Rights Clinic.
I've always been the type of person that's been able to read and study and kind of focus and concentrate. So it hasn't been as severe for me. But I know a lot of guys who really struggle with it almost immediately. I've seen guys have breakdowns almost immediately. Very sociable people who go back there and can't take it. They're kicking the door, they're pacing the floor, they're dealing with anxiety, they're cussing out staff, they're cussing out other people, they're suffering delirium.
Charges were eventually dismissed, but officials claimed extending human rights to prisoners would disrupt the operation of state prisons. At Virginia's Coalition for Justice, founder Margaret Breslau disagreed.
In all the years that Askari has been advocating for prisoner rights, there's never been a disruption.
She thought it was a mistake to punish a man who's had a positive impact on fellow prisoners over the years.
He has never been in a fight. He has never engaged in behavior against a guard. Never.
Still, Lumumba ended up at the Supermax prison Red Onion, where he was confined to a cell the size of a parking space for at least 22 hours a day, with no natural light, limited visitation, and few privileges. His wife, Nicole Rosser, said he was again being punished for speaking out.
They had been reading his emails, listening to all his phone calls, and when they read the email, they threw him back in solitary again.
She was not allowed to visit or speak with Lumumba by phone, but she pleaded with the state for his release.
It's such a shortage of black men out here. The ones that's on the right track, like him, we need them home to help us raise the next generation. He's not one of those gangbangers or anything like that. He's just trying to bring awareness and positivity to the world.
Families of prisoners endure their own hardships, and Rosser's was the worst. In her husband's absence, a former boyfriend began stalking Nicole and eventually stabbed her to death outside her home. Askari Lumumba grieved privately. The prison offered no words of consolation or counseling, but he's vowed to achieve the goals that he and Nicole set, for him to be freed from prison and to work in the community, helping other young black men to understand what he learned during more than 30 years of incarceration. He's been refused parole 4 times, but will come up again in the fourth quarter of 2024. With a relatively new administration in place, Lumumba hopes this could be the year he's released into a community where he hopes to make a positive difference.